What's the difference between this...
You can choose, Bassam. Put your faith in me.
I tried. And in the end, you thought it best to control me.
and this?
Of course, pal. Whatever you think is best, I will see to it.
Sure.
While both scenes portray similar conflicts, one feels significantly more compelling than the other. Why? Subtext. In Red Dead, the specifics of how these two people feel about each other are communicated with subtle gestures, intonations, and pauses. This is in stark contrast to Assassin's Creed, where everything is spelled out in the text, making for a more passive viewing experience since there's very little to interpret. Now, weak, uninspired writing is nothing new in the gaming industry, but Ubisoft are seemingly the kings of this form of mediocrity. It's impossible not to be bewildered by how low of a bar these writers set for themselves, and how they, every year, barely, just barely, manage to climb over it. I think this is worth picking at because they keep building narratively driven games with almost no narrative substance behind them. It's pseudo-narrative, if you will. The aesthetics of a story is there with no actual substance to cling on to. And what makes that especially annoying is how high the return on investment is when it comes to good writing. Animation, environments, and the cinematics themselves are expensive. Writing is not. Good writing is rare, sure, but it isn't rare because it's costly. It's rare because it requires taste, restraint, and a willingness to make characters uncomfortable. Ubisoft's fundamental misunderstanding is etched deep in how they approach narrative. They think they should be writing for an action movie, when their games demand the craft of a prestige drama series. I mean, look at the run times. These stories aren't 2 hours, they're not even 10. They're 20, 30, 50 hours. Structurally, they're far closer to television than film, and that matters, because TV doesn't survive on plot alone. In a movie, you can coast on momentum. You can get away with one-note archetypes because you're always barreling toward the next set piece or the next big moment. There simply isn't time for contemplation, so the audience often forgives some simplicity. But if you're asking someone to live with your characters for 90 episodes, you don't get to bring an archetype and call it a day. You need contradictions. You need a private life that keeps conflicting with the public one. You need scenes that are about something other than the surface level exchange of information. Because how would you otherwise do it? If your game doesn't have that ever-present underlying narrative, people might still play it, but they won't remember it. They won't carry it around. This is where Ubisoft keeps falling into the same trap. They write dialogue that functions like transportation. Lines that exist to move you from point A to point B, to keep rhythm, to keep the mission briefing alive.
Who are you?
I was sent to recover Lord Sadatame's letter.
Oh, you won't want to when you learn what took it.
It's an acceptable sin in a 2-hour action film, where propulsion is the entire point. That's why you can't really extend movies with a lot of substanceless dialogue into more than 3 hours. Beyond that, you need something more in order to sustain the characters for a longer period of time. The thing is, it's not like Ubisoft doesn't try to add drama. They do the gestures. You get the tragic backstory. You get speeches about freedom, revenge, destiny, and honor. The ingredients are technically there, but without any subtext, what you see is exactly what you get.
My family built ships on Corellia. We were wealthy, powerful, and we hated each other. Then the Empire came, smelled weakness, tore us apart. Hate turned to murder, and here I am, the last survivor.
So how can this be improved? I think a ridiculously effective way to generate subtext is to give your characters suppressed guilt. Not performative guilt where they announce it like a resume, not the kind where the narrative taps the sign every 10 minutes. Real guilt, the kind they consciously or subconsciously bury so they can keep functioning. When that's done right, it makes every scene feel like it has a second pulse underneath it. The audience watches the character manage themselves in real time. Every smile becomes strategic. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every act of kindness becomes questionable. Look at Don Draper, Kim Wexler, Tony Soprano. Or this guy even, who just won an Emmy because of the very way he portrayed this specific character trait. These characters don't need a monologue every time they enter a room. It's in the way they listen, the way they hesitate, in the way they often try to be decent while knowing exactly who and what they actually are. Ironically, what makes these characters so authentic to real life is that they're fundamentally artificial. The characters themselves are play acting to an extent through large chunks of their stories, usually afraid to expose who they truly are until they feel like they can't take it anymore, which leads to a moment of catharsis where they take off the mask. These characters feel authentic because they inhabit a rich sense of inner conflict that leaks out through behavior, not exposition. That's the easy win. That's the lever Ubisoft refuses to pull. Instead, Ubisoft protagonists often feel narratively clean. Their motivations are legible, their morality is straightforward, their trauma is functional, and their dialogue tends to say exactly what it means. Even when they're pitched as conflicted, the conflict is usually simplified into a slogan: revenge, justice, freedom, family, honor. These characters are often very easy to summarize in a character bio. But how would you distill Tony Soprano? The level of complexity there makes it impossible to do without doing injustice to the character. I know the anti-hero archetype is somewhat overused at this point, but there is no denying that almost all of the most memorable characters also are anti-heroes. It's actually a trope for a good reason. I mean, look at the past 15 years of AAA games, and ask yourselves which stories have universally resonated the most. It's these three, right? Arthur, Joel, and Kratos are all the definition of anti-heroes, but that affords them the necessary depth that sustains them. They're fundamentally simple stories, inhabited by rich, complex characters. That's why Red Dead Redemption 2 can spend a shocking amount of time on what looks like, on paper, mundanity. You move camp, do jobs, trouble grows, people fracture. You can summarize huge sections of it in a paragraph. Yet it's constantly engaging because the story is happening inside the characters. The same is true for The Last of Us. Strip away the infected and the road trip structure, and the core is simple. Two people travel, bond, collide with what they've lost, and make choices they can't unmake. The reason it sticks isn't because the plot is clever. It's because the story is. The characters are dense enough that a small external beat detonates into pages of internal consequence. I mean, think about it. Every added plot detail takes up real estate that could have been reserved for story. That isn't an argument for nothing happens. It's an argument for choosing the smallest possible plot that still pressures the characters, because pressure is what reveals them. Ubisoft does the opposite. They pad plot. They add factions, lore, conspiracies, twists, gadgets, secret orders, and increasingly baroque mission chains, because content needs to be content. They treat plot like the thing you buy, as if story is a luxury item. So the game becomes stuffed with events, but starved of meaning. And here's the part that's almost funny, if it wasn't so consistent. Ubisoft will often write a scene where the setup could lead to subtext, then immediately sand it down until it's safe.
Why should I trust you?
Because I'll be honest with you, regardless of what it costs me.
Honest about what?
Everything I did in Iga.
So, we've established the fact that Ubisoft are incapable of writing individual scenes in a compelling way. But let's zoom out for a second. Weak scenes are weak scenes. No amount of grand mythology will fix dialogue that has no interior life. Still, you would expect a company with Ubisoft's scale to compensate elsewhere, to build an overarching structure sturdy enough to at least generate momentum and meaning through sheer architecture. What you find instead across multiple flagship releases is a recurring structural failure that keeps kneecapping whatever the writers might have wanted to do. A devotion to non-linearity as a default setting. This isn't non-linearity in the interesting sense, where the form is part of the point. Non-linearity can be brilliant when the story is built for it. In a game where the player has to assemble how, for example, a murder took place, based on scattered but interconnected pieces, that can both be interesting and well suited to the medium. But Ubisoft's version is usually far more banal. It's a modular anthology layout grafted onto a story that still wants to behave like a conventional long-form drama, and the mismatch quietly sabotages everything that makes drama work. The obvious upside is player autonomy. You can choose which strand to pull first, which region to clear, which major arc to start with. It feels generous, it feels modern, it looks great on a box. The downside is that the moment you allow the main narrative to be consumed in almost any order, you also force the writing to assume almost nothing. The story has to behave like a TV series, where the audience might randomly start on episode 6, jump to episode 2, then finish with episode 4, and still be able to follow along. That constraint is not just inconvenient, it changes the nature of what can be written. Good long-form storytelling runs on accumulation. Cause and effect pile up until the pile becomes a personality, and then the personality starts making decisions that earlier versions of the character could not have made. Relationships evolve because previous scenes altered the trust between two people. Meaning deepens because later revelations recontextualize earlier choices. Subtext thrives because the audience shares a growing bank of private knowledge about the character, and the writing can lean on what both parties already understand without having to restate it. Ubisoft's modular structure starves all of that. Once a narrative has to remain playable in any order, the safest strategy becomes emotional stasis. Characters can't change too much, because significant change makes later content inconsistent, depending on what you did first. Relationships can't develop too precisely, because you might trigger an intimacy beat before you have earned the tension that should precede it. Moral decline can't be paced properly, because pacing requires sequence. This is why so many Ubisoft protagonists feel oddly frozen. They speak with conviction, they emote on cue, they receive backstory injections, but the internal temperature rarely shifts in a way that changes how they behave across the full runtime. The story keeps moving, while the character remains compatible with every possible order of events. The collateral damage shows up in the dialogue. When the narrative can't rely on shared context, scenes start doing extra work to keep the player oriented. Characters repeat motivations, restate conflicts, reintroduce names, and clarify stakes that should already be vibrating under the conversation. This pushes the writing towards summary instead of tension. Subtext is not a decorative flourish you sprinkle on top of a scene. It depends on what is being withheld, and withholding depends on confidence that the audience can track what's missing. A modular story, designed to be entered from many directions, steadily erodes that confidence until the writing becomes front-facing by necessity. That front-facing quality is where Ubisoft's pseudo-narrative feeling really comes from. The plot still progresses, often at great length and with lavish production value, but the scenes rarely accumulate into a changing inner life. You get events, revelations, betrayals, factions, secret orders, lore cascades, and speeches that announce themes. What you do not consistently get is the slow reshaping of a person under pressure, the part that turns content into story. If the script has to stay compatible with a shuffled playlist, it begins to sound like a playlist too. Each track self-contained, each chorus reminding you what the song is about. Very little reliance on what came before. This is also why Ubisoft loves complexity in the wrong places. Modular structure makes character progression difficult, so plot density becomes the substitute. Add another faction, add another threat, add another historical detour. Hey, I know it's harsh to write off so much storytelling so easily. I get it. But I do think that going forward, two major changes in how these games are made could be massively helpful when it comes to their long-term impact. First, the top-down mandate for the anthology structure has to go. This is non-negotiable. Second, New writers' rooms need to be put in place at Ubisoft Montreal, Quebec, Bordeaux, and Massive. Hiring people with real, proven careers in television is a strong place to start. Not only will they have a sharper grasp of what makes storytelling work at scale, they'll also know what a functional, disciplined, inspired writer's room actually looks like, and how to protect it when production pressure hits. Those two changes can go a long way, because right now, we really are at rock bottom. And yes, I do think Ubisoft cares. But on games this huge, there are so many moving parts competing for time, money, and attention that story becomes the easiest thing to defer until it's too late. So if Ubisoft wants these worlds to matter again, this can't be treated like polish. It has to be treated like architecture. Tear out the mandate, rebuild the room, and give it real authority. Because while spectacle looks good in trailers, it's the rich, layered storytelling that's actually going to be selling your game down the line.